today's going to be a fun podcast. We've got a returning guest. He's joined us on radio and on video podcast before, former Congressman, and Dr. Ron Paul. How are you, sir?
Very well, David, and it's nice to be with you again.
Yeah, it's great to see you. And I just saw you at the Young Americans for Liberty conference. You're just in my neck of the woods when you came down to Florida.
Oh.
And man, it felt like it was 2008 all over again.
Yeah, it gave me a good feeling. I guess I can admit that. You know, it's nice. It's nice to find a lot of people who are interested in what we've been talking about for a lot of years.
Yeah, and then, on the other side, I saw that weekend after that Donald Trump mentioned you in his CPAC speech in Texas. And he said, I never heard him talk about you hardly, and he brought you up in a speech. Did you see that?
Yeah, somebody told me that, but I never heard it. So it would be fascinating to know what he said. But they said, it was in a positive tone. So
yeah,
that's interesting. So
he said something like, he can be a little difficult on some things, but when he's with you, he's with you. That's what he said.
Well, it's not, I said, are you sure? Are you sure he wasn't to talk about Rand? But somebody said
he talked
no.
about both. He mentioned both. He said you're just like your son. You guys, when you're with them on certain issues,
Well, that should ring a bell, don't you think?
Yeah. And I thought,
why isn't that a good idea?
Yeah. And then that same CPAC in Texas, his guy, Steve Bannon, he culminated his speech with abolish the Federal Reserve. And I said, my goodness, what's going on? It feels like Ron Paul's ideas are starting to get a little bit more interesting to those people.
Well, like I said at the beginning of YL, the revolution is alive and well.
Now, I don't know if there was any coincidence to that or if that was, but then right after Trump mentions you and Steve Bannon calls for the abolition of the Federal Reserve, then Trump gets raided at Mar-a-Lago. So
yeah. Well, we will not act as if we're overconfident. Right.
So we still got a few challenges ahead of us, don't we?
That's for sure. But like you said, I think it's good to enjoy ourselves in doing it. Sometimes it's not easy when you have to talk about some of the stupid, evil things that the people in charge do. But it's also good, like at the YAL conference or Mises conference or one of our conferences, it's so different than just being exposed to, say, liberal authoritarian television.
Right.
It's much different. So I think of the positive things, and that's why I do believe there's reason that we should work on understanding what is positive, and that we should be optimists. And even though nobody knows the immediate future, I think you can estimate what could happen if you do the right thing. So,
right.
And that gives people hope. I think if you say, I think if you're nihilistic and say there's no hope, you can't know the truth. What are you guys messing around for? That's stupid. And but there's an opportunity, but that's a subject that goes not just a couple hundred years or 1,000 years. That's all of history. All of written history has dealt with that issue on good and evil. And that's that'll be around a while. And of course, I think the division is there. There are people who are very, very knowledgeable and know exactly which side they're on. There are others that are very, very vehement. And there's a lot of other people who, sort of float around and are looking for signals on what to do. And that to me is, it means there's always an opening for us.
Yeah.
I thought about that with COVID, that the people went along too easily, but once in a while people got disgusted and somebody would stand up and say, this is ridiculous.
Right.
Then you'd get a bunch of a crowd doing it, and maybe they would go out and fire, a whole school board. So, the activity is there, and we, in spite of the freedoms that we lose, like the other day when they added 87,000 IRS inspectors on us, it's actually, good to know that good can come of it, but you have to be aware that there's an enemy out there, and we'll keep trying to identify it and seeing if we can help get rid of that enemy and have them endorse the principles of freedom.
Yeah, my father is a minister and he's not doing well right now. He's trying to recover. But when I told him that I was going to interview today, he said, "You tell Dr. Paul that I commend him for his witness in his testimony. He thought that the way you handled matters of faith in the public square was a great example. That you weren't using it as some kind of gimmick, but you practiced what you preach. You didn't call names or resort to lies. You just told the truth and you did it consistently through the years." And so he wanted to pass that message along, that you're a great example of being a good Christian witness.
That's very nice. Thank him for me.
And the reason I wanted to have you on was the topic of nihilism. You talked about that in your Young Americans for Liberty speech, and I thought, that's interesting. You don't really hear politicians talking about, not that you're a politician anymore, but you don't really hear people in the political sphere talking about nihilism. And I don't remember you even mentioning nihilism too much in your original campaigns, but I think you've touched on something that is at the heart of where we're at culturally right now, which is this idea that truth is not real, right?
That's right. And as I think about it more and more, it really brings things together, because if you're nihilistic, say in economics or even the monetary system, there's good and bad there, but it's also, the evil that comes in is when people do what they have done, with the Federal Reserve, and it's owned by a few people. It's used to fight wars and used just for special interests. It's used to transfer wealth from the middle class to the wealthy. And a lot of people would say, and this was certainly the attitude that was stronger when I went to Congress in '76. They said, "What are you talking about? This Federal Reserve all the time and stuff." But of course, it was that issue that came about for, at the end of Bretton Woods in 1971. But I think I can, in my own mind at least, there's a relationship, whether it's an economic policy or a social policy or a spiritual policy. But, I think so. I think the way it's handled, it is something I think a lot about, as the delivery of a message that is every bit as important as the message itself, because you can turn people off as fast as you can get them interested if you don't do it right. If you're domineering and authoritarian, saying, "I don't know why you think that way. That doesn't make any sense to me." That's not the way to get a convert or just somebody interested. That's why I delight when I meet somebody that I consider, he or she might consider themselves, progressive Democrats, and with a lot of compassion. So their views won't be totally like mine, but they would be that way and agree on civil liberties and on the war issue. And I think bringing things together, as long as there's an acceptance that that you can work things out and recognize the real damage. And in Washington, I recognize the people who really, really were nihilistic, and they weren't nice people. And some of them had, as a matter of fact, many of them who make it to the top tier in congressional leadership are that way, because they have to be wheelers and dealers. They have to trade votes and trade money and raise money, and they have no thought about, a higher law or higher principles of, the law that is eventually is individual, and it isn't it isn't dictated by even a single minister or by a professor or by your schools or whatever, and certainly not the legislative bodies, because it boils down, and I think this is fascinating and makes life very, very interesting, and that is the old-fashioned belief that people have free will and they can make a difference, and that's the way the world works. Sometimes people might wonder, well, why was it made this way? It doesn't make any sense. There's so many problems in the world. But it turns out that the more you understand that, the more you understand that there are reasons for that. And the understanding of free will, I think, is so important, because the nihilism is the one that is the most difficult to undermine, and some of them are just they're sort of a mixed bag. They're nihilistic, even though their image is, and they pretend that they're not nihilistic. What they want to do is transfer the spirit of a higher law into what they're doing, and they're actually endorsing policies that are nihilistic. That's sort of like taking the monetaristic issue and saying, well, money is good to help the people, and we need to be helpful to people, and we need to be progressive. And they attach that to a monetary system, which is really nihilistic because it's total consumption of liberty and wealth. And so then you get involved with total ignorance too, that comes along. But there are so many, that are Nietzschean in the sense that there's no way nobody can know the truth. And that is such a devastating issue. And who knows the truth? We have to follow the people who know the truth. It isn't so much that one individual would know the truth. It's the fact that truth does exist and that there's something to strive for. So I work on the assumption that there will never be, that mankind is never going to all of a sudden see a perfect society that endorses the principle of a higher law, or a society that everybody agrees that everything is nihilistic, and that there is no truth. But the people who don't believe there's a truth, they don't even strive. Why would they strive for it? Why would they want to even talk to somebody who happens to believe in a spirituality connected to a higher law? It divides to the point where all effort to change the country, the world, or whatever should be voluntary. And if you want to promote the principles you believe in, it should be done through voluntarism. It should be done by setting examples. I've said many times on my debates on the presidential campaign is that you should set, because I was highly criticized for the foreign policy. I said, well, you don't have the authority and you don't have the ability to go all of a sudden and eliminate the violations of civil liberties in China. But it might be that if we set a good standard and deal with the violation of civil liberties here in this country, maybe there will be somebody in China someplace say, this capitalism and this freedom and property and voluntarism sounds like a pretty good idea. So it's a big thing that is the approach. But nihilists, they're not interested. They've made up their mind. There is no such thing. So let's not even pretend unless it serves the benefit of our beliefs in nihilism. Then they will pretend that like going to war. Oh, we go to war, which is nihilistic. We go to war because we're spreading democracy, and we're spreading our Constitution. We're protecting our liberties, and which is total nonsense. You go to an illegal, immoral, unconstitutional war, for those reasons, but they pretend, and that's a little sorting out you have to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting how they had in Kabul, Afghanistan, the American embassy had a mural of George Floyd, the guy who was, killed by the police officer. And you think to yourself, what kind of nihilistic empire paints their victims in a far off country and saying, hey, isn't it sad that this man died while they're bombing those same people? You need to like our victims too. What kind of a cult? It seems like a cult,
And they have room in there, the way they look at things, at being very inconsistent. But I have found, especially when we were dealing with COVID, that average people who might not be close to our beliefs would be stirred by the inconsistency. When you see a Pelosi, preaching a gospel about wear your mask, we need to do that, all that authoritarian stuff. And then they get a picture of her out violating every rule she ever made the people follow. People don't like that, no matter where they come from, whether they're right, left, middle, or nihilists, or whatever they consider themselves. They do not like that. And it's a lie. It's a lie, and really part of that nihilistic spirit. And but people generally, it's amazing how appealing that was to people who didn't consider themselves to be in our camp.
Yeah. I think that when you talk about free will, it was, at least in the Western tradition, it was a lot to do with Christianity is what created the concept of free will in the minds of people, because the ancient world didn't have a concept of free will. The gods imposed their will on you, and you had to sacrifice or get out of the way. And, babies were left to die on the side of the roads in the Roman Empire. And now, 2,000 years later, after what I call Jesus's personhood revolution. I call him the founder of the liberty movement. He really founded liberty and the personhood revolution in history. Now we have a world in which we are very sensitive to the least of these, and so a big progress has been made. And I think we are moving in a positive direction overall.
Yeah, I found it fascinating to go back more recently and read Murray Rothbard, because I knew Murray quite well and had a lot of long discussions with him. Anything from the abortion issue on up to whatever, because he always said he wasn't bashful. He wanted to put it right on the table. He said, "I'm a non-believer." In other words, I don't believe in God. I'm a non-believer. And yet he said some statements that were so positive on what you were just saying about Christianity. And he had very favorable things talk about Catholicism. And that may invite a debate or something, but he said that the Christianity, in his understanding, was the greatest motive for the development of individual liberty and the Enlightenment, and actually the some of the basic foundations of our Constitution.
Right.
And that so surprised me. I mean, they were strong. I knew he wasn't an antagonist, just to ridicule some. I know have friends like that are always wanting to egg me on. How could you be a believer? That kind of stuff. But it wasn't ugly. They tried to do it. Now Murray's is strictly intellectual, but it's great to hear it from him.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus said, "Do not resist evil with violence." That would seem to indicate a non-interventionist or non-violent ethic, right?
Yeah.
But
blessed are the peacemakers.
Yeah, you got booed in the Republican primary. I remember that in South Carolina for saying that. They all went to church the next day, didn't they? They said, what day was that? It was on a weekend. One day you're booing the guy for quoting Jesus. The next day you're in church singing the song.
Well, the one that I got the biggest kick out of, because I'm sure you know my position, that the very vicious drug laws of prohibition, they don't work, and it's supposed to be handled differently. And so somebody asked me a pretty pointed question, and I think it might have been in South Carolina, and it had to do. It was a Christian audience. They said, "Would you legalize heroin?" And of course, I dislike heroin and all that drug stuff. I'm so anti, but not anti how you solve the problem. I think it should be solved in a different way than, just more government guns and laws. So they were hissing and hooing, and I said, "All right then." He says, "If we legalize heroin tomorrow, tell me how many of you would use it because it's legal?"
Yeah.
Nobody raised their hand.
Right.
It really gets to be silly.
Yeah.
And
but
how many people die because of the drug war?
I think that the reason why our government has continued to control so much of our lives, I mean, you look at the woke stuff, it's all about ritual conformity. It's all about, now you change your name, it's just like in religion, you go from your name, then your baptismal name. Now you have, people changing their name and they change their gender. So there's all these rituals and religious things that are becoming more and more totalitarian. And I think it's really an imitation of Christianity with guns. I call it, it's a revenge of it's a violent form of a Christianity, where you say, well, we're going to outcompete this religion. We're going to create a messianic state, and it's going to encompass every aspect of your life. You can't watch TV without it being pumped into your mind 24/7. This is a religion that we're dealing with. This is really a contest of religion, isn't it?
Right. And that's the reason why an authoritarian approach, no matter how noble you think the cause is, it doesn't work. And the emphasis has to be on persuasion and setting examples. Because if it's the authoritarian approach, that's been tried for many, many years, hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, with Christianity, they had the final answer. And as I said at the beginning of this discussion, is you have to believe in something, you have to have a goal, but that doesn't mean every single answer. You're searching all the time. I keep searching for as much understanding as possible, but I'm always searching for an understanding of the best way to answer the tough questions. Because if you're running as a Christian libertarian, they're going to challenge you in many different ways, because you can't say, well, the government shouldn't do that. That's illegal. That's a violation of this and this. Well, it just happens that maybe technically every word would be, technically right, but it would be emotionally wrong.
Right.
And we're human beings, and I think that you have to recognize that that we're given, free will to try to persuade people rather than badger them.
Yeah. I mean, can you imagine that this company has been able to get government support to mandate their product? And there's evidence that in 2013, they had already patented the components necessary to make this thing transmit to humans.
Yeah, and some of those vaccines, they got the FDA to approve them, and they didn't even exist.
Yeah.
That's how ridiculous it is. And that's why difficult problems should be taken out of the hands of government. I mean, not removing government, but make government something very local, individual. We want to govern our lives. We want separation of church and state. We want to separate education, and state. So all of these things, but it's something that people have to know what their goals are. If they don't know what they believe in, it's not going to work. And so there are days when things look like people are waking up, and then there are days when I look at it and they say, nobody cares about anything.
Mm-hmm.
But when you see how much evil is done, I just really detest this stuff going on with this nihilism, the nihilists, promoting all this stuff. Anything where from designing vaccines for kids under 5 years of age, and people can't wait to be able to get a hold of this stuff, and allowing children to change their sex without the permission of the parent. When I started medicine, I couldn't put a single stitch in a child in the emergency room without the parent knowing about it, and I'd have to get permission. I'd either have to come in or talk to them on the phone. But that's long gone now. Now it's to the point where you can take it and mutilate a child.
Yeah.
And I don't know, that might reach the qualification for being nihilistic.
I think so. It's all about people. We're told don't have children. We're told, the world will blow up if you have more kids because the pollution. We're told to, change your gender so you can't have kids. Told to have abortion. It's all in it feels as if there's a malevolent spirit. I talked to Dr. Naomi Wolf. She's a Democrat, and she's been good on the pandemic. And she said through the course of studying how corrupt and evil this is, it's brought her closer to a belief in God. Have you seen a spiritual tone to the things you're seeing? A lot of people say, I didn't believe in God, but then when I saw how satanic this system looks, it made me think there may be something to this, Yeah.
I think people arrive at those conclusions or a positive enlightenment. It's unpredictable. There are different ways that come about, and maybe that falls into the category of free will.
Yeah. But I wanted to ask you also about the recent nomination of folks like Blake Masters, folks who, Anthony Sabatini in Florida. He's a good friend of our program. He comes on regularly. Blake Masters, of course, he's the GOP nominee for U.S. Senate out of Arizona. He's credited you as being a great, a figure in his development of his ideas. He's talked about the Federal Reserve. He's talked about the food pyramid being corrupt. What do you think about this idea of that new generation of folks, people like Anthony Sabatini, Blake Masters, who are running, who have a view that seems similar to your message?
Well, I think it's pretty exciting. And I'm always very pleased to learn of different names. It would be nice. Let's say there's 6 people that could join Thomas Massey, this year or something like that. But that's good. That's positive. We should continue to do that because it's a vehicle. I never I never worked on the assumption that I was going to change the world. Like if they get me in there, I'm going to get rid of the Fed. I was never unrealistic about what I can do. Matter of fact, I always surprised on the other end because I didn't think I'd ever get elected to Congress with the philosophy of non-intervention. I never thought I would be able to stay there. So I've always been very pleased with that. But it's good when you find people. But the other thing that I've run into are people that have that got influenced, and some of them were teenagers when they got influenced with in politics when I was running, in 08 and 012, that they got interested. And I always said, you have a responsibility and do this. And then sometimes they'd ask me, what exactly should I do? They wanted the precise answer. And my answer was, do whatever you want to do,
Right.
but get well informed and go and do it. But now I run into people who have started their own organization. They even have podcasts and radio programs and write articles. And there are a lot more out there than I ever dreamed. But there's probably a lot more out there than even those individuals who may be just getting started. David, maybe your program has influenced more people than you know.
Yeah.
But, you can't count the remnant, but we can work on building it.
Yeah. It seems like what I've seen that's interesting is it seems like with Tucker Carlson and all these different figures, they're not quite libertarian on some of the things that you believe on, like the drug war and stuff like that, but they're pretty good on war, the foreign policy. They're pretty good on, condemning some of these civil liberties abuses and FBI abuses. And they're pretty good on some of the social issues, and they're coming around on some of the economic stuff. So it seems like the message of liberty really is becoming more and more mainstream, at least in a lot of parts of the political atmosphere here. It's
and I think as things deteriorate, there'll be more people looking for options. That's why you have to do our very best to preserve the vehicle. And I always thought the internet would be the perfect vehicle, and it's still a good vehicle to you.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to talk to people and relate to them. And I enjoy working with, if I discover a progressive Democrat who's honest and a principled and a moral person, but just disagrees with me on economic policy. But they might be really good on foreign policy and really good on personal civil liberties, and they understand that. And I don't know which direction that's going. Dennis Kucinich is the one that I work with the most, but anytime I saw an opening there that they would support one or two things out of the three principles of libertarianism, I thought, well, this is good. Maybe they'll say, oh, I see, you're consistent. You're going to apply the same principles to the welfare state as you are to the warfare state. And so often, but I think the light bulb coming on has been expressed to me more by young people than by the person that's been in the Chamber of Commerce and the Democratic and Republican Party for 40 years. I don't get many people saying, boy, yeah, I've been thinking about that for 40 years. You've convinced me. I don't hear that, but I see a lot of young people who you might have been in grade school or high school or college or even later, saying they are quite willing to say, you've convinced me. And now I see it.
I was about 18 when you ran in 2008 in the primary. And I know folks, I just saw last night, Jack Posobiec, he's popular with a lot of the Trump, world. He's a writer at Human Events. He put out a tweet saying Donald Trump should announce Ron Paul as his VP candidate and run again, just to stick it to the establishment. So he's a younger guy. So I think you're right that a lot of the actual younger generations have really integrated the lessons that we learned in that movement that you were doing into our common thought. It's not just a thing on the side there, but of course, politics is a lagging indicator of change, right?
Right. And, people would say, they could look at this, the conventional Republican or Democrat could look at it and say, yeah, you did this and you had your couple days of fame, and they look there and it's, it's past, but that's all been dropped.
Yeah.
But that's not the measurement that I look at. I'm sure you would understand this. The measurement isn't so much, that they measure everything by how many pieces of legislation did you actually get passed,
Yeah.
and how much has happened in Washington. You didn't clean up the Federal Reserve. You didn't clean up the FBI. You didn't deal with the CIA. You still have troops all over the world. So everything, would be negative, and everything is the same. But underneath all this, the underpinnings of what we're talking about now, and you mentioned, and that is the change in attitude. People are disgusted. It's sort of like people woke up about the overbearing rules and regulations on COVID, and a lot of people change their tune. So I think right now, I think there's a lot of people. One thing that I sort of was quite pleased with, that when I was working with the legislation audit the Fed, which was a stretch because when I went there, nobody cared about it. But we had every Republican vote for audit the Fed, and a lot of Democrats voted for it. Of course,
Yeah.
they said, well, yeah, but what happened? Well,
Yeah.
we're taking one step at a time. But what happens is the conditions, but we do, and even in the conventional world, we see a lot more people
Yeah.
saying the Federal Reserve, they don't even know what they're doing.
Right. I mean,
So
that's why I brought up at the beginning with Steve Bannon. Steve Bannon is basically, Donald Trump's Karl Rove. So think about it. When you were running in the era of Bush, right? I mean, he's fading out, and you're dealing with that kind of Republican Party. Fast forward to now, in the establishment, the most powerful force in the Republican Party is that movement around Trump. And his right-hand man is saying, we don't need to audit the Fed. We need to abolish the Fed. And I'm thinking, I've heard that before. You're moving, the Overton window is moving very rapidly. I mean, that's not an upstart candidate. That's the main brand in Republican Party politics is saying abolish the Fed, So that's a good thing.
It always seems to go too slowly.
Yeah.
But when things get bad, things have to move more quickly, because then if there's a monetary collapse, that's why our views are very important, that they're out there and people know about it, and they might understand what you really need to do.
Yeah.
Guess where they're minting cold coins? In Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
I hear stories. I write it off. That's not going to be much. But you read stories about it, very interesting. The people want it and look at it, and they're learning a lesson, I think, is the important thing. But wouldn't it be neat if somebody would come along and do that, some unsuspecting group? What if even the people who aren't, in our camp, maybe spiritually, maybe the people in China would start a gold standard? That'd be a bit of irony, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And but if it's an economic truth, it could happen. And actually, we dump our gold and we got rid of it and we avoid it. At the same time, some of these countries that we think are awful people, they've been buying up gold. So who knows what will happen? But eventually there will be a big opportunity. So that's when I think you might see reform and then a major change in both monetary policy and the principles of freedom.
Yeah, I think that they're going to try to control the demolition of the dollar and put a central bank digital currency. It'll be important to have an off-ramp from that. But Dr. Paul, I really appreciate your time, and I thank you for spending this time with us exploring the effects of nihilism and what's at stake in this contest today.
David, thank you. Nice to be with you.
Very good. Take care.